So I've been working on privatization issues for a long time. Obviously, for Public Interest Alberta, our main mandate is to fight for better quality public services and institutions. So the counter to that is challenging the privatization that's going on. So we have 7 task forces that work on issues related to advocacy on childcare, human services and poverty, the environment, democracy, education, post-secondary education, and seniors care. Rod is actually the chair of our post-secondary education task force now, and so I'll leave that stuff to speak to him. What I want to do tonight is 3 things. I want to explore some examples of privatization. I could give you 25, 30 examples of privatization happening in Alberta, but I'm going to zero in on just a few of them, particularly so we can understand how privatization comes about. And most importantly then, the last thing I want to do is talk about what we can do about it as citizens. It's not enough to come to a place and analyze the problem and declare victory and go home. It's very important to analyze it and then say, what can we do about it? And so
put rocks on the road.
Put rocks on the road. There's a good, right there, exactly. We need to ramp it up, and we'll get to the ramp up part in a second here. So, are we good?
Yeah,
are we good on
good? Thanks.
You ran all the way home? Thank you for running. You never know. You never know. We got a backup just in case. So the first example I want to talk about is childcare. Children 0 to 6 years of age in Alberta are faced primarily with a privatized system. We had, back in the 80s, actually, a lot of public childcare systems run through our municipalities across this province. And in many parts of Canada, you have public childcare systems, particularly in places like Ontario, that are fully funded via their municipalities. But what happened in the 80s is, because of cutbacks and reshifting, most of the municipalities in Alberta abandoned their childcare spaces. So there are 4 municipal childcare centres to this day: Jasper, Valley, Beaumont, and another one I can't quite remember. But for the most part, what happened was not-for-profit organizations banded together, created childcare centres, but a lot of for-profit mom and pops came into it. So there's a lot of home care, there's a lot of licensed childcare, but the vast majority of childcare is provided in unregulated, no licensed spaces that are out there. There's a crisis in childcare going on, and that crisis actually allows for more and more privatization. So fast forward to today, over 50% of all childcare in Alberta is provided by private not-for-profits, or private companies, and the rest not-for-profits. But you have, entering into Alberta, some very large corporate players that are going on, that are profiting from the crisis in childcare, and that's what markets strive on. People are desperate to find spaces for their children. We did a session in Calgary a few weeks ago. People are putting their names on waiting lists before they are even pregnant, because it's 2 years often to get into good quality childcare in Calgary and Edmonton. So this company that's come in, that's publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange now, is very aggressive. They used to be called Edlian, that's what they're traded on the TSX on, but they're now called Bright Paths. And they're busy buying up a lot of the small mom and pop centers, and they're forcing out a lot of the not-for-profits that are having a hard time competing. They've raised over $40 million on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and so they're growing very rapidly, and their corporate headquarters is in Calgary, of course. This company had some of the same people who were involved in the largest childcare corporation in the world, ABC Corporation, that started in Australia in 1990 with 1 childcare center, and by 2007 they were operating in 11 countries in the world, and they had 25% of all childcare spaces in Australia were controlled by this ABC Corporation. The real estate market collapsed in 2007. This company went into bankruptcy. The Australian government had to step in because they shut down 25% of all childcare spaces, and they had to spend $18 million in Australia alone just to keep the doors open for 1 month while they tried to figure out what was going on. So there's a lot of stories in that particular story. this is a vital necessity that you know, we need. We have K-12 education, public education for our children that are older. Why do we have a privatized system for early childhood education and care? And that's what our Child Care Task Force has been focusing in on. But we're up against some very extensive corporations. We were successful in getting Edmonton Public School Boards to block Edlian at the time from arranging a deal where they would actually go into our schools and run private for-profit childcare in the schools, which does exist, but really on a small micro level. So we've had some victories with respect to that, and we've got a lot of work happening around that. With respect to seniors care, the other end of the spectrum, here you have privatization that is really privatization of health care just for seniors. What happened in 1990, they decided to separate out the lodging of seniors care from our long-term care system and start charging for that. So 1999, the Brody Commission went through, and 2000, 2001, they began charging for long-term care. But the province regulates the cost of a long-term care space. So it's $48.50 a day for a semi-private room, or $54 a day for a private room in a long-term care facility. The private sector was encouraged to invest in that and to expand into long-term care, but they chose rather to go more into what's called assisted living. Long-term care is under the Nursing Home Act and is regulated, and it says how much health care has to be provided to seniors that are the most frail. You can't just decide to move into a long-term care. You have to be medically assessed as requiring that level of care. But assisted living facilities, it's the Wild West. So you can open up an assisted living facility. Obviously there's some regulations around fire, those sorts of things. Licensing is done. But you can charge whatever you want, and you can, and with respect to how much services are provided, that's up to you. So the Parkland Institute came out with an excellent study. We just did a 13-city speaking tour with them and Friends of Medicare, talking about how privatization of care is impacting on seniors. And in that study, they talk about how profitable it is for companies to invest in assisted living. So that's where you're seeing this massive growth. You're seeing a shift to assisted living, but you're not seeing the investments into the long-term care, which is what we absolutely need in Alberta. There's a crisis going on. There are so many seniors across Alberta in acute care hospitals waiting for placement in long-term care, but they don't make as much profit off that. So the provincial government has, for the last number of years through their ASLI program, been subsidizing corporations to build more seniors care places, or what they call continuing care. The vast majority of that, as I said, is going into assisted living rather than directing it. So you're seeing companies like Age Care, who is a very big supporter of the Conservative Redford government, getting huge contracts. Last year they got 2 contracts worth $16 million to invest in two facilities. Thanks, taxpayers of Alberta, for your $16 million. We now own this real estate, and if Age Care, as many mid-sized companies do, decides to sell their property a few years down the road, who pockets that 16 million bucks? They do, right? So this is a form of privatization where the taxpayers of Alberta are subsidizing these companies to provide this care, but there's no controls over it, nor can we see the contracts that are out there. I had a meeting with the Minister of Health and the Minister of Seniors last week, our Seniors Task Force. After we occupied the Minister of Health's office, he finally agreed to meet with us, because he refused to leave his office until he did. So it was great, occupying an office with a bunch of people who are in their 70s and 80s was definitely a fun thing. So you're seeing huge investments, though, from corporations in seniors care, and that's the transition that's happening. But ultimately, what's happening is the public is paying for these companies to privately deliver the care, but meanwhile they're paying down their investments in their actual real estate, the buildings, etc., which is where they actually, in the long term, are going to make their money, is off the sale of that real estate. So another example of privatization is the Southeast LRT line here in Edmonton. I hope most of you know that City Council was forced to reverse its decision with respect to the new line from downtown to Millwoods. They had agreed to apply the P3 Canada fund that the Harper government had. But originally in May 2012, they only wanted to do it as a design, build, finance, public-private partnership. There was a vote. Our previous mayor, Mayor Mandel, was pushing for the whole thing to be privatized, but they voted against the operations and the maintenance being privatized as well. Our federal government, you see we've got a Harper resign now sign over there, thank you, Ecuador, basically said, we're not going to give you a dime unless you completely privatize it. So instead of Edmonton Transit running our new LRT line, it's going to be a private corporation in the world. And let's keep in mind that the $1.8 billion project is only from downtown to Mill Woods. The whole project is going to be more like $3.6 billion because it's going to go from Mill Woods to Lewis Estates in the west. So this is a huge privatization battle that's going on here in Edmonton, and I know the council's been very involved, and we want to get others involved in that. We've done various things we've created a website and a campaign called Our LRT, O-U-R-L-R-T, and we did polls, and we've done communications, and we did a bunch of things during the election. Now the question is what's City Council going to do? They're short of money, and we're hoping that what they'll do is actually put on a public forum, and let's debate the merits of P3s, and let's talk about how what's going to actually be put in that request for proposals that the companies are going to have to go forward with. And so there's a lot of opportunities there to move forward on that. Now, we know that there have been other P3s that have tried here in Edmonton and Calgary, etc., where we've been successful in stopping that. And I think we're going to be potentially successful in stopping this privatization of our public transit here eventually. What happened a number of years ago, we were involved in a debate over the Southwest Rec Center, where they debated for years about developing that one as a public-private partnership. We thought we lost that one when City Council agreed they would move forward as a public-private partnership. In the end, because organizations and individuals have put so much pressure and questions on City Council, the requirements for this rec center in Southwest Edmonton, when the city manager went to negotiate it, the company turned around and said, well, instead of 4 sheets of ice, we're only going to give you 2, and it's going to be a little more expensive. Blah, blah, blah. So the city manager had to come back to City Council, and because there had been so much pressure, City Council just said, forget it. We'll do it on our own. We'll do it as a traditional design build. We're gonna control this ourselves. And the Southwest Rec Center today is open and run as a public part of our recreation centers here. So these are examples of where you think sometimes you're advocating and you're losing or whatever, but because you have put political pressure on the decision makers, in the end, when push comes to shove and the companies come back and say, look, we can't really build this LRT for $1.8 billion, it's going to cost $2.5 billion. At that point, we will have potentially an opportunity to reverse. So lastly, the water markets, we are working with the network Our Water is Not for Sale on the notion of privatized water markets. In southern Alberta, anything south of the Red Deer River, the only way to get a water license is to buy it from an existing license holder, and this effectively creates a water license market. I won't go into all the technical details on that, but the province is talking about expanding that water market province-wide. They did such a wonderful job on deregulating our electricity industry. They thought they should do it with access to water, and that's a really critical issue. If you're not already signed up on the Our Water's Not for Sale network on this, it's critical that we move forward. More importantly, though, what's about to happen is we think the provincial government's about to announce that they're going to have the water and wastewater services provided mostly by municipalities in Alberta, regionalized. And I've talked to the Director of Water Policy for the province, and he said this is certainly the direction it seems like they want to go. What that will mean is smaller cities, and Edmonton as well, will be responsible for a much bigger region to deliver water and wastewater. And on the surface, that sounds quite fine. Add to the fact that the federal government, the Harper government, has increased the standards on water and wastewater that is to take effect over the next number of years. And so many municipalities are faced with literally hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure costs that they're going to have to put in place. And now if you're talking about not just for the city of Medicine Hat, but the region around Medicine Hat, that's huge. So they'll do the same thing that they did with the city council on the LRT, they'll say, we'll give you $200 million so you can upgrade your wastewater, but that has to be done privately. So you see how the different levels of government are working together. Sadly, what's happening is, and interestingly enough, is EPCOR, used to be Edmonton Power Corporation, corporatized in 1995, but 100% owned by us, the citizens of Edmonton, is one of the largest proponents of privatization of water now. They hived off Capital Power, privatized that behind closed doors without any public consultation whatsoever, and we fought that. But the question is EPCOR sees this as a great opportunity to go to all sorts of other cities, privatize their water, and in theory keep our taxes low by heavy dividends. So we have an opportunity and frankly a responsibility here in Edmonton to be watching what's going on and to raising this and to say, look, we shouldn't be privatizing off this. So just very quickly, I know I'm lightly over my time, we're talking about selling off, there's various ways of privatization. So we've talked about selling off of public assets, like we privatized the liquor stores currently, and I think AP might talk about this. Land titles is a huge issue coming forward. They want to privatize our land titles, which is something, not very sexy, but really, really important that we have to be paying attention of. And Trevor, I don't know if you'll talk or mention that later on, or you will? Excellent. Okay, I won't go into that. The whole thing around P3 is obviously being pushed by P3 Canada, but our schools are being built as public-private partnerships now. The new schools that have been announced, they haven't said exactly if they're going to be public-private partnerships, but that seems to be the indication. They're starving the system, the public system, while encouraging private development. So that's the strategy. Underfund and undermine the people's view of the public system while encouraging and giving money to the private sector. So that's another way where privatization happens, rather than just saying we're selling this off. You unbundle and privatize services, so Rod will probably talk about that at the university and others, where you say, well, in a hospital we don't need to do the cleaning, we'll privatize that off to be clean, or etc., other things that are going on. And ultimately it's about undermining public confidence in government and the public sector. That's part of the process of shifting the population. There's a ton of right-wing organizations out there doing research, talking about these things, and their communications is always the same. They always talk about private sector being more efficient. They talk about we're going to create a system of choice, and ultimately for government it will reduce risk and take the debt off their books. But it's all one taxpayer, and we all pay for it one way or the other. And so we have to be able to understand their language and fight back against it. So you also see the fact that there's corporate involvement all over the place. The university requires corporate leaders to be on their senate. Corporate board directors are absolutely everywhere. And again, people get to go, oh, we can't challenge or fight against corporations. They'll donate to our arts groups and what have you. No, we have to be able to recognize what it is. And ultimately, it's about democracy in Alberta. Campaign finance rules, such as they are in Alberta, means that the PC party is collecting just under 70% of all their campaign contributions from corporations. So are we surprised that they're going to put in place policies at the end of the day that see massive subsidies of privatization? And finally, just briefly, we've been going through in Alberta what's called results-based budgeting in every single ministry. The central question that the Premier has asked every ministry to do through results-based budgeting is saying, can this service be done by the private sector? So that's part of the process that's been going on, and that's where we've been seeing massive cuts. So we need to fight back. We had Alison Pollock, some of you may have heard her last week. We had 160 people out. She's from the UK. She did a beautiful job. We have her video going up on our website and our PowerPoint. We have to do research to debunk the myths about privatization. It's so fabulous to have the Parkland Institute doing the report they did on the LRT, on seniors care, etc., working with us. But we have to reach out. We have to outreach and build allies. So many different sectors need to start working together, and that's what we're trying to do, is to help coordinate that. And we have to learn how to communicate and effectively challenge what's going on. They have a lot of high-priced people who are out there communicating about this, and we have to be able to challenge them on that. But ultimately, these are political decisions. We have to mobilize people. We have to get them out in the streets. We have to occupy their offices. maybe some rocks on roads, there's a good idea as we move forward. But people have to get organized and get active. There'll be a federal election in 2015. We have to start organizing now. We have to start connecting the fact, do you want your public transit privatized? Well, let's talk about the role that Harper government is pushing in that. Because you can better believe once they privatize the one line, a couple of years later they're going to come back and say, well, this company's doing such a good job, why don't we turn the whole system over to them? Why don't we why don't we privatize Canada Post? Why don't we privatize our schools? Why don't we privatize our hospitals? One thing leads to another, right? But my main message is we've been successful. The healthcare debate, all the stuff that's been working, Canadians get it, and Albertans get it, that public delivery of public services matter, and that you're going to get better quality in the long run. It's going to be more open and transparent, but if we don't fight for it, we're going to lose it. So that's why I hope what we're going to do tonight. Thank you.